Hello and welcome to session 1 of the General Class License Pool. This is the Ham Radio Crash Course version of things where I go through just the right answers and explain why they are the right answers, as well as take some of the helpful hints that you can get over at hamstudy.org when you make an account. The website's free, the app is $4. It's a fantastic way of getting your studying done and get ready for that general test. Let's go ahead and go over there now. I am using the application. You can select to read or go through the order of questions based off of the books you're studying with. So if you're using the ARRL book or the Gordon West book, then you may need to change this. But right now, we're just going through the bog standard sub-element list, and we're starting in sub-element 1. All right, this is broken down into 5 sections, a number of questions there, on which HF and or MF amateur radio bands are there portions where general class licenses cannot transmit. And the answer is C, 80, 40, 20, and 15 meters. Starting us off hot with a question that pertains to getting your extra class upgrade. Generals are limited in the frequency allocations that they have on 80, 40, 20, and 15 meters. You need to upgrade to extra if you want to get the lower portions of the single sideband space or the lower portions of the CW space. So keep that in mind because that is an important thing to note. Question 2. On which of the following bands is phone operation prohibited? And the answer is 30 meters. This is one of those memory type ones where you just kind of have to look at the band plan. By the way, as always, print out a band plan, have a nifty guide, or have the ARRL website available at all times that you can look up. But if you see 30 meters there, see how it's all just red? It's 200 watts PEP. And then the E, A, and G on one line implies extras, advanced, and general. They are not issuing advanced license anymore, but I believe some of them still exist. 30 meters is generally for CW and digital modes and that sort of thing, so keep in mind. Question 3. On which of the following bands is image transmission prohibited? That is 30 meters as well. The reason for that is image transmission is generally done over single sideband. That is a voice mode of operation. Image translation is SSTV, so it is prohibited on 30 meters. Question 4. Which of the following amateur radio bands is restricted to communication only on specific channels rather than frequency ranges? 60 meters. And again, if we go back to our band plan chart there, look right there. That's 60 meters, and it's channelized. It's one of the only HF bands that does that. It's because we're not a primary user on that band, and they want us to line up right in those parking spaces. So make sure you do follow that. That is the unique band of the entire band plan, 60 meters. Question 5. On which of the following frequencies are general class licenses prohibited from operating as control operator? And that is 7.125 and 7.175. Let's hit the explain and see what Ham Study says. You are only allowed to operate in frequency spaces where the operation class allows you to do so. The general class license allows transmission of voice 7.175 and 7.300, but not between 7.125 and 7.175. However, both are allowed spaces for advanced and extra class operators. 28.00 megahertz and 28.025 megahertz and 21.275 to 21.300 are both allowed spaces to transmit with the general class license. That last one's just as kind of like an additional explainer. Let's show you again the band plan. I know this is going to come up a lot as we go through this one, but if you look at 40 meters and you look at that bottom swim lane, we call those horizontal line swim lanes, there's a gap between the red bar. That's CW. That's where CW should be done, Morse code. And then next to that, there's a gap, and then the green line starts. Well, amateur extras and advanced have access right at the beginning of the single sideband or voice spaces of the 40-meter band, whereas generals just do not. They do not have privileges to transmit there. You can listen to your heart's content, but do not transmit there. And this question may be a funnier way of explaining or asking the question of where are they prohibited, and it's in the space that extras roam. So just keep that in mind. That's also another good reason to upgrade is a lot of the DX stations, particularly the DXpedition groups that go out there, they sometimes start on the extra positions, and those are usually a good place to be. So, question 6, which of the following applies when the FCC rules designate the amateur service as a secondary user on the band? I kind of already mentioned something like that. Amateur stations must not cause harmful interference to the primary users and must accept interference from the primary users. I would like to caveat this as amateur extras, amateur generals, and technicians should not be creating interference to any users, even other amateur radio operators. If you are doing that maliciously, just move frequencies, right? But in this case specifically, it's saying that the primary user could be creating interference on you, and that's totally fine that they do so. So just move along. Question 7. On which amateur radio frequencies in the 10-meter band may stations with a general class control operator transmit CW emissions? And the answer is D, the entire band. One of the great advantages of Morse code is that you can use it anywhere in 10 meters. So there you go. You can generally use Morse code on any bands in any space that you have privilege to transmit. Yes, even the single sideband spaces. Question H. Which HF band segments exclusively allocated to amateur extra licenses? So this is a flippy floppy on the previous question. That is 80 meters, 40 meters, 20 meters, and 15 meters. You will see a number of questions like this where if you get the right answer on the first half of it, like, are there segments where general class can only transmit? It's like, yes. And then they're saying, well, what's the other side? Are there segments where only extra can transmit? Yes. So you learned one thing and now you got both sides. They just wrote it differently. So that's a good one. Question 9. Which of the following frequencies is within the general class portion of the 15-meter band? This is challenging your ability to remember frequency allocations. And so if we look at 15 meters, where is it? Right there, down at the bottom, right there next to 60. Where does that start? 21 megahertz through 21.450 megahertz. And so what's in there? 21,300 kilohertz. That's just another way of expressing megahertz. Number 10, what portion of the 10-meter band is available for repeater use? And it is the portion above 29.5. Now, you have band allocations that talk about licenses, like I keep hearkening back to, but you noticed in that big green swath of space in the upper right-hand corner of 10 meters, it doesn't say how we utilize the 10-meter band. And we do that via the form of kind of an agreement on how best to do it. And repeaters sometimes need a space carved out for them where the frequencies can be used and allocated and really prevented from interfered upon the best we can. And so that space, 29.5 megahertz and above, is where that is done. Number 11, when general class licenses are not permitted to use the entire voice portion of the band, which portion of the voice segment is available to them? It's the upper frequency portion, right? So again, we covered it with 40 meters again, that little notch out that's there. That notch is for extra class operators and advanced. So you can take up the portion, the higher side of the portion, which is above 7.175 megahertz. All right. So we just finished our first sub-element of a sub-element, and so we're going to move on to G1B. Yes, they break things down in kind of different ways. So we are in sub-element 1 in the Bravo subsection. Question 1. All right. What is the maximum height above ground for an antenna structure not near a public use airport without requiring notification of the FAA and registration with the FCC? Surprisingly, it's 200 feet. 200 feet is actually pretty high. So just keep in mind, you could put up a 200-foot antenna if you wanted to without having to notify the FAA or registering with the FCC. 200 feet is a lot of antenna. Let me just say that. I'd be happy with a 50-foot freestanding mast at this point. 100 feet, though. That's your sweet spot. Question 2. Which of the following conditions must beacon stations comply? A. No more than one beacon station may transmit in the same band from the same station location. Yeah. So you want to just keep this to one beacon. Beacons are helpful for lots of things, like determining how well you are receiving outside signals, because you're picking them up with the beacon. 10 meters is a place where we use beacons a lot to determine if there are any DX openings. Which of the following is a purpose of a beacon station as identified in the FCC rules? I kind of already gave you a spoiler on that. observation of propagation and reception. So if I put a beacon, multiple beacons, all over the place in the world, and I put them on similar frequencies or the same frequencies, and I have them change their transmission time, I can determine if I'm hearing any of those beacons, usually registered by call sign, or you hear their call sign, to see if I have a window of communication available to them. Something like single sideband or Morse code you could use to communicate with any individual that was in that beacon space. Beacons are incredibly useful, and they're also a lot of fun to listen to those frequencies and hear beacons kind of come out of the noise at you and be like, hey, we got a window, we got an opening, let's get on the radio. Number 4, which of the following transmissions is permitted for all amateur radio stations? C, occasional retransmission of weather and propagation forecast information from U.S. government stations. Pretty cool. I want to read the explain on that one. Oh boy. You got a whole FCC rule set on this. And the explanation actually comes from Part 97 of the FCC rules. This permits transmission of informational bulletins. This is understood to include occasional rebroadcasts of information of use to the amateur radio community. Test transmission should always include one's call sign. Note, brief transmissions to make adjustments and enable two-way communication, antenna tuning, for example, are permitted. Retransmission of amateur station signals is allowed only by auxiliary, repeater, and space stations. Coded transmissions are never permitted on the amateur radio bands, even for health information generally covered by privacy law. Yep, there's no HIPAA in amateur radio, meaning you can still violate HIPAA by using the bands and putting information out there you shouldn't, so keep that in mind, because you can't encrypt. Number 5, which of the following one-way transmissions are permitted? That's B, transmissions to assist with the learning of international Morse code. Very good. Got some dude out there just hammering out code like, this is for learning. Number 6, under what conditions are state and local governments permitted to regulate amateur radio antenna structures? C, amateur service communications must be reasonably accommodated, and regulations must constitute the minimal practical to accommodate a legitimate purpose of the state or local authority. That's kind of wordy. Let's explain that a little bit. In 1985, the FCC issued an unofficial document known as PRB1 as guidance for state and local regulation of amateur radio service antennas. The 11-page document has been codified as Section 97.15B in the Code of Federal Regulations. PRB1 states that local government must reasonably accommodate amateur operations, but they may still zone for height, safety, and aesthetic concerns. So if all of those things are on the table, I don't know what reasonable is here. This is I'm a little dubious on that. Not the question, understand the answer, but not a big fan of some of the wiggle room there. Question 7, what are the restrictions on the use of abbreviations or procedural signals in the amateur radio service? B, they may be used if they do not obscure the meaning of the message. So we can use Q code, right? We love QRP, QST, QRZ, and QR, whatever else. QST, right? Yeah, something like that. All of them. Those are all known, meaning they're published on a website, many websites, and you can look up the information that they hold at any time. No hidden or obscured message. 8, when is it permissible to communicate with amateur stations in countries outside the areas administered by the Federal Communications Commission? And it's B, when the contact is with amateurs in another country except those administrations have notified the ITU that they object to such communications. So it's kind of interesting that you would, in some cases, need to look up if someone is trying to communicate with you from what country they are from, because they might not be known within the ITU as a country that is willing to have radio communications happening in their country. This is more about kind of the governance of the people within that country, and that the country, the one that's saying thou shalt not let their citizens transmit out of their country, is basically saying to the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, that they do not want them on the air, and that we, amateurs, should abide by that and not communicate with them. Number 9, On what HF frequencies are automatically controlled beacons permitted? We talked about beacons. 10 meters, that's 28.2 hundred megahertz to 28.300 megahertz. And you hear them out there every day. Question 10. What is the power limit of a beacon station? 100 watts. 100 watts peak envelope power. That is the limit. And frankly, you don't really want any more than that because you want to know when the window's open to 100 watt stations, which is what you see most on the bands. Question 11. Who or what determines good engineering and good amateur practice as applied to the operation of the amateur station in all respects not covered by the Part 97 rules? And that is, at least in the United States, the FCC. Makes sense. And that is the end of Section G1B. Let's go on to Section G1C, moving right along through sub-element 1. Question 1. What is the maximum transmitter power of an amateur station that may use on 10.140 megahertz? We talked about the 30-meter band earlier, and it is 200 watts peak envelope power. And yes, that is something you do need to abide by. Question 2. What is the maximum transmitter power an amateur station may use in the 12-meter band? This band is much like all the other ones where our maximum power output is 1,500 watts peak envelope power, or PEP. Number 3. What is the maximum bandwidth permitted by FCC rules for amateur radio stations transmitting on upper sideband frequencies in the 60-meter band? And the answer is 2.8 kilohertz. That's the maximum bandwidth that your voice is allowed, or the modulation of your radio is allowed to take up. So make sure you limit it to 2.8 and go no higher. Question 4. Which of the following is required by the FCC rules when operating in a 60-meter band? If you are using an antenna other than a dipole, you must keep a record of the gain of your antenna. Yeah, if you think about an antenna like a Yagi, where you get a 6-to-1, or you got 6 dB of gain coming out the front of that, and you're putting 100 watts down it, you're going to get more power going in that forward direction, more of your power going in that forward direction, and you need to keep an eye on that. Number 5, what is the limit of transmitter power on the 28 megahertz band for a general class operator? Just like the other band, 12 meters already mentioned, 1,500 watts PEP. Question 6, what is the limit for transmitter power on the 1.8 megahertz band? 1,500 watts PEP. Number 7, what must be done before using a new digital protocol on the air? And the answer is publicly document the technical characteristics of the protocol. Part of that is because, at a certain degree, a digital mode of operation that has not been documented publicly could be thought of as encryption. Because if you don't know how to decode it, and you don't know how it works, then it's not really public, is it? Yes, so that's why. Number 9, what is the maximum power limit on the 60-meter band? It is 100 watts PEP with respect to a dipole. So keep that in mind. It is slightly different. Number 11, what measurement is specified by the FCC rules that regulate maximum power? And that's peak envelope power output from the transmitter. We call that PEP or PEP. Nobody really says PEP, though. And there you go. We completed section C. Moving on to D. Question 1. Who may receive partial credit for the elements presented by an expired amateur radio license? Any person who can demonstrate that they once held an FCC-issued general, advanced, or amateur extra license that was not revoked by the FCC. Number 2, what license examinations may you administer as an accredited volunteer examiner holding a general class license? And you may want to do that once you get your general. The answer is C, technician only, meaning whatever license you have, you can proctor the test that's the lower level, right? So if you're an extra, that's the only one that you can do extra tests, because there's nothing higher than that. But you got to be an extra if you want to test for general. Number 3, on which of the following band segments may you operate if you are a technician class operator and have an unexpired certificate of successful completion of the examination, or the CSCE, for general class privileges? C, on any general or technician class band segment. There you go. You have your license, basically. You have the privileges. Question 4. Who must observe the administration of a technician class license examination? At least 3 volunteer examiners of general class or higher, and that is option A. Number 5. When operating a U.S. station by remote control from outside the country, what license is required of the control operator? And that is A, U.S. operator primary station license. That is a somewhat tricky one. Let's read a little bit more. Since the remote transmission will physically originate from the U.S., you must have the license required by the land of origin. Now that it's written that way, that totally makes sense. Thus, an FCC amateur operator's license that allows you the privileges of the frequency you will be operating on. So, yeah, if there's a remote station, and if you don't know this, you can rent time, or maybe your friend even has a station that is accessible via the internet that will even include transmitting. And if you're going to transmit on a station that's in the United States, yes, you need to have the United States call sign with the privileges that radio is transmitting on. Question 6. Until an upgrade to general class is shown in the FCC database, when must a technician license identify with AG for amateur general after their call sign? And the answer is A, whenever they operate using general class frequency privileges. Because you don't show up in the database yet, hams that you talk to will see your call sign, perhaps look you up on websites and see that, hey, it just says technician. What is this person doing on the general frequencies? So you need to give them a heads up that you just passed your license. And the way we do that is we say slant AG or AG after your call sign. Question 7. Volunteer examiners are accredited by what organization? And it is C, a volunteer examiner coordinator. There are a number of VECs in the United States. One is ran by the ARRL, and they will accredit you or can accredit you to become a VE, a volunteer examiner. Number 8. Which of the following criteria must be met for a non-U.S. citizen to be an accredited volunteer examiner? And the answer is B. The person must hold a FCC-granted amateur radio stations of general class or above. Technicians cannot test other technicians, so if you want to become a volunteer examiner, you need to at least have general to do so. Question 9. How long is a certificate of successful completion of examination valid for exam element credit? The answer is C, 1 year, 365 days. Question 10. What is the minimum age that one must be to qualify as an accredited volunteer examiner? This is one of the times where you actually do have an age limit. The answer is B, 18. But there is technically no limit on how young you can be to get an amateur radio license, even a general. So congratulations for all the young people that are going after this license. Question 11. What action is required to obtain a new general class license after a previously held license has expired and the 2-year grace period has passed? D. The applicant must show proof of the appropriate expired license grant and pass the current Element 2 exam. Question D. When operating a station in South America by remote control over the internet from the U.S., what regulations apply? And C, only those of the remote station's country. So we just did the remote station in U.S. and you're outside the U.S. What do you need? A U.S. license. Here's the flip side. If you figured that one out, this is one of those twofers. If the remote station is in a South American country, you need to follow whatever the rules are of that South American radio station. So there you go. That is the end of section D. We're moving on to E now. Question 1. Which of the following would disqualify a third party from participating in sending a message via an amateur radio station? A. The third party's amateur license has been revoked and not reinstated, meaning persona non grata to the bands. Question 2. When may a 10-meter repeater retransmit the 2-meter signal from a station that has a technician class control operator? The answer is D, only if the 10-meter repeater control operator holds at least a general class license. Likely because the repeaters are in a space that technicians cannot use. That's the big one that I see there. Question 3. What is required to conduct communications with a digital station operating under automatic control outside the automatic control band segments? A. The station initiating the control must be under local or remote control. Do you need an explanation? Let's see what it says. An automatic control digital station means a station that is unattended and which transmits in data modes. And they're using RTTY, radio teletype, as an example, which is a digital mode, on frequencies that are allocated for data emission. So they're in the right space. The interrogating station must be under local or remote control. In other words, it cannot be interrogated by another automatically controlled station, meaning can't hippity hop, I guess, between stations. Third-party traffic is perfectly acceptable, provided that it follows the rules for third-party messages. There are no restrictions as to what license class the control operator of the interrogating station can be. Question 4. Which of the following conditions require a licensed amateur radio operator to take specific steps to avoid harmful interference to other users or facilities? D, all these choices are correct. That's our first one of these in the entire sub-element. When operating within 1 mile of the FCC monitoring, when using a band where the amateur service is secondary, and when a station is transmitting spread spectrum emissions. All these choices are correct. Item 5. What are restrictions on messages sent to a third party in a country with which there is a third-party agreement? C. They must relate to amateur radio or remarks of a personal character or messages related to emergencies or disaster relief. So there you go. Got to follow those rules if you're talking with third-party region countries. Question 6. The frequency allocations of which International Telecommunications Union region apply to radio amateurs operating in North and South America. So they carve up the world in regions, and North and South America belong to Region 2, item C. Question 7. In which part of the 2.4 gigahertz band may an amateur station communicate with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations? D. No part. None at all. You're not talking to Wi-Fi. Question 8. What is the maximum PEP output allowed for spread spectrum communications? Limited to 10 watts. Only 10. Question 10. Why should an amateur operator normally avoid transmitting on 14.100, 18.110, 21.150, 24.930, and 28.200? And the answer is A. A system of propagation beacon stations operates on those frequencies. Now, it says should avoid, right? Should avoid transmitting. You're not prohibited, meaning somebody's coming after you. But generally, your communications will not be effective, and you could be interrupting somebody's very strong interest in being able to hear what beacons they can actually receive. So maybe use another frequency. Question 11. On which bands may automatically controlled stations transmitting RTTY or data emissions communicate with other automatically controlled digital stations? The answer is D. Anywhere in the 6 meter or shorter wavelength bands and in limited segments of some of the HF bands. Question 12. When may a third-party messages be transmitted via remote control? And the answer is A, under any circumstances in which third-party messages are permitted by FCC rules. So you are allowed to do third-party messages if their third-party rules are met by the FCC. Let's read the explanation. There are no additional restrictions placed, I think that's what it says, on third-party messages simply because they are being transmitted remotely. A way to remember this is knowing that you always must follow the FCC rules, so just look for FCC rules. Well, I think we just finished sub-element 1. So let's take a look. Yeah, go back up to the sub-element level. We've now looked at all the questions, sub-elements, section A through E. Section 1 is complete. This is going to be one of the easier question sub-elements for most people. Rules are generally easy to follow, and except for that last one where it's kind of like, you got to follow the FCC rules because you got to follow the FCC rules. The rules are pretty straightforward, and usually no one has a hard time passing sub-element G1. So it's off to studying for you. Make sure you take a study test on hamstudy.org today. Take that app with you, carry it with you wherever you go, and take some practice exams throughout the day to start building your backlog of results so that the app and Ham Study knows how to tell you which sub-elements you need a little bit more help in. It'll help you out in the long run. It'll help you get your tests and your questions and your license upgrade faster. Sub-element 1 is in the can. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Josh, KI6NAZ. Please bookmark or subscribe to the playlist below if you want to continue the general class license pool. Best of luck out there. I hope to make a contact with you on HF soon. I'm Josh, KI6NAZ 73.